My talk today will outline histories of various hidden and inaccessible databases that I have worked with over the years. I will speak to the history of AI image development as a continuation of photographic indexicality, the use of predictive AI systems within law enforcement, and methodologies to complicate and question our relationship with these new technologies. Lastly, I'll introduce some of my most recent research with the Parser project. And can everybody hear me okay? Audio sounds good?
Yes, very clear and loud.
Excellent. Eigengrau, from the German intrinsic gray, it's the almost black you see when you close your eyes in a dark room. It's the latent image of visual perception analogous to chemical photographic discourse. The latent image is the impression that has been exposed onto film but sits waiting within the silver halide crystals in the emulsion. A suspended image, invisible, one that is simultaneously fixed and fleeting, a closed eye hallucination, an image that manages to escape indexicality. The realm of all possibilities transfixes this potentiality. Similarly, we turn to the blank state of the GAN, the neural noise awaiting its training regimen, the static stasis of machine learning and image synthesis. Indexicality, the concept borrowed from Gunning and Barths, has captured photographic discourse for the last 40 years. The ability for a photograph to point, to specify, to denote has been the momentum of the individuation of photographic thinking and points to the myth of the individual artist as the lone genius of his time. Subsequently, machine leveling of the internet has quickly unraveled these myths in its ability to co-opt, replicate, circumscribe, and aggregate all variants of every image photographed by this camera of Babel. Photographs no longer function in a static moment, a decisive moment, an indexical punctum. Images move, they vibrate, they shit pick and deep fry. They dissolve into lo-fi and resolve into fake depth awareness via machine learning algorithms. Take any old digital snapshot from the early aughts, the hiccup of resolution wasteland, and process it through image deconvolution. What emerges from the other side is a fictional resolution, aspirational deepfakes, fledgling megapixels now with a veneer of preserved details 2.0 and super resolution via iterative refinement and so on. Back, Joanna Zielinska studied the inherent abstraction in early as an non-human vision, decentering oneself and staying with dissociative visuality. This is a provocation to the lineage of anthropocentric, geocentric, oculocentric models that plague pre-Enlightenment paradigms extending through modernity. Seeing as a non-human is our greatest heliocentric challenge, as all photographs are essentially extrinsic, decentered from our bodies, and also images made by the sun, and in turn, all photographs are photographs of the sun. Today, we judge images from a different vantage. The corpus has infinite potential. Lev Manovich's observations from the late 90s has never rung truer. The database dominates. The default structure of narrative rationale has been replaced with logical, legible database thinking in almost every facet of lives. Our open browser tab paradigm has arrived, but came in quietly through the side gate. The database colors our lives in every capacity, all the way from the immediacy of class consciousness via the gig economy to the opacity of the database logic of governments and tech giants. If surveillance capitalism is permitted to permeate every facet of our lives, what is left but to make a bastardized version of ourselves to feed the algorithm? Let us embrace the non-human, abstract, and inherent illegibility of our cyborgian selves. For this talk, I consider the notion of a superimposition. A superimposition implies layering, building complexity, juxtapositions used to clarify or perhaps nullify. Superimpositions are imposing forces, prompting entropy and uncertainty onto the empirical order. As Legacy Russell maintains that glitch is an active word, we can imagine the superimposition of the illegible self within the network of an ever-expanding field of hyperlegibility, an infinite vision and aggregation that produces a grand register of meaning. Superimpositions imply the metaphysical space of unknowing, the divine, the mystic, and the non-human indecipherability. I will give one example of this tension between the US imperialist state of hyperlegibility and my desire to superimpose metaphysical unknowing in my project Channeling from 2019. But first, I will share some quick slides of past works. So just to give a quick overview of things that I've worked on in the past, this is Cypher from 2011, working with WikiLeaks to produce this. This is a collaborative sculpture that I made in 2014. This is an exhibition that I had at the Mattress Factory Museum of Art, 2016. Exhibition at Ex-Girlfriend Gallery in Berlin, 2017. Series of single board microcomputers, sculpture projects. It's an exhibition I had at the National Gallery of Kosovo in 2017 for my anthology project. Work that I made when I was living in Iceland. This is from an exhibition that I had at Document Gallery 2016. And some other images of Eigengrau, which I just touched upon. More images from my show at Document. And this is my most recent solo exhibition at Document Gallery in 2020. These are thermoformed Kydex electroluminescent paint and custom electronics. And I always like to include this in my talks. This is some floppy disks that I collected when I was living in Lithuania. When I was a teenager, I was obsessed with collecting computer viruses and subsequently ruined a lot of computers as a result. And I like to think of it as inadvertently maybe my first artwork that I ever made. Following the successful May 2nd, 2011 Operation Neptune Spear raid on the Abbottabad compound, which resulted in the execution of Osama bin Laden, his son, and 3 other colleagues, US Navy SEALs recovered 10 computer hard drives, documents, DVDs, over 100 flash drives, a dozen cell phones, and other electronic equipment. The materials from the compound show here years later as a bulldozed site, were initially analyzed at a separate secret location in Afghanistan, where data forensics specialists organized and researched the material looking for actionable items relative to the United States' interest in targeting al-Qaeda. In November of 2017, the Central Intelligence Agency released the complete contents of Osama bin Laden's Abbottabad digital library collected from the raid. This release followed several previous Freedom of Information Act partial disclosures in 2015 and 2016, which included declassified material, digital novels, media articles, and religious documents. This now complete collection of data includes system files, propaganda videos, software tutorials, religious audio sermons, Western television shows and movies, home movies, and document files, approximately 470,000 files in total. Here are some individual file examples. As a culmination of my time as a fellow at the Jan van Eyck Academy in Maastricht, Netherlands in 2018, I produced a new video and sculptural works for several exhibitions following my fellowship. My research considers the Abbottabad compound release of digital materials as a site of history, imagination, mental architecture, and corporealization of a disappeared body. Understood as a repository of thinking, the archive can be read through the lens of transhumanism and can function as both the individual agency, desire, ideology, and mythos of bin Laden, those of his family in the compound, and an aggregation of collective visual culture of a specific moment in time. I'm interested in conceptualizing today's computational resources as an elementary prosthetic consciousness. Consider the Human Connectome Project, a brain mapping project situated at the University of Southern California and federally funded by the National Institute of Humanities. The research is producing an exhaustive cellular three-dimensional model of the mind. The project may have the possibility to integrate other fields of artificial intelligence, including bioprinting and wetware. From a cryonicist standpoint, these developments give a path towards immortality by creating neural correlates of consciousness that are reproducible. Image synthesis with machine learning is an incremental step toward neurobiological artificial intelligence. Like a mind map, the Abbottabad repository contains bin Laden's thoughts, desires, ideologies, insights into his motivations and inner life. In my reading of the archive, I question the division between the digital archive and the human body. Understanding the archive as a site of legacy, memorial, or anthropological fragment of consciousness serves as a means to subvert the intentions of the Central Intelligence Agency, whose motivations of the release are fraught with strategic capital violence. When working on the channeling project, I produced a large-scale LED screen work in collaboration with computer scientists from Carnegie Mellon University using a generative adversarial network, GAN, which has trained on the Abbottabad materials to create new content that generates infinitely. I will now pivot a moment away from my research and outputs in the realm of AI and consider the larger motivations of total vision domination as a result of late-stage surveillance capitalism to resist this to become a conductive thread. In 2020, amid the uprisings in the wake of George Floyd's murder at the hands of police officer Derek Chauvin, U.S. and Customs Border Protection flew a Predator drone over the city of Minneapolis to surveil the events on the ground from 20,000 feet in the sky. This flight spurred public criticism of militarized surveillance of protest movements and drew attention to the growing use of aerial drones in the United States. Sure, that's not starting. Okay. Footage captured by the drone was made available through a Freedom of Information Act request in 2020. Using this footage as a document of militarized surveillance, my video work in collaboration with artist Danny Giles repurposes as the backup voices of resistance to speak back. For this work, a diverse range of poets, activists to contribute spoken verses responding to this footage, addressing dynamics of visibility and political resistance. Our project, currently in the pre-production phases, is to compile the words of these contributors into both a feature-length film and printed publication, enabling greater accessibility and reach for the project. We're currently fundraising to facilitate the production as well as the commissioning of new texts by scholars in the fields of surveillance studies, Black studies, activism, and poetics. I would like to highlight this project today within the context of this talk and the larger symposium on artificial intelligence for the recognition of an AI image synthesis, which is in line with the thirst for an infinite vision. A camera lens that extends through space-time and reaches through the confines of imagination, coming out the other side of predictive analytics, pre-crime, and numerous other weaponizations of the crystal ball of speculative resolution. In the hands of empire, information systems move in a unified direction towards omniscience, all-knowing, omnipresence, all-pervasive, and omnipotence, all-powerful, in a pervasive totalitarianism fantasy and megalomaniacal consolidation of power. And I have a little chart of that, those three. Image synthesis and predictive technologies introduce a new dimension to this trinity, an infinitely emergent or infinitely birthing principle, all emergent, which I will call omnigenic or omnigenesis. Let us consider the digital colonialism and techno-totalitarianism of our moment and how we can work as artists within but against these systems. Technology is often considered as an emergent and uncontrollable entity, a structure with no grand and singular authorship, a force of liberation and solution to all that ails us. But this is a common misconception. The research, development, and deployment of vision technologies has always been funded by the military-industrial complex and adjacent partnerships, and has always been used to concentrate power through them. Our vision and metadata systems echo the same power structures that built them. It is no coincidence that the undersea cables of our information flowing across ocean floors follow the same lines as the voyages of exploration of the colonial empires of the 1700s. This slide is pretty incredible of showing machine bias and people's preferences for what those machines, like if the machine had to kill something, who it would kill first. So starting down with a cat would die first, and then stroller being the most valuable thing to, it's kind of the trolley problem, right? Technology is being actively deployed to subordinate, exploit, and oppress marginalized people of specific race, class, and religious beliefs. We should look to the technological oppression of the Uyghur people in China and Mexican citizens at the United States border as examples of where technology expresses itself most soberly in our present moment. This is the European Agency for Fundamental Human Rights. The EU IT systems, which call into question fundamental human rights of asylum seekers. And these are some things that you can research later on your own if you're interested. This is ECIS, the European Criminal Records Information System that keeps a centralized database of EU member state criminal records, which specifically targets vulnerable populations of asylum seekers. This is the ETIAS, lots of acronyms, the European Travel Information and Authorization System, which creates similar databases of 90-day visa travelers outside of the Schengen zone. And then this is just released, which is expanding the European Parliament's powers of using artificial intelligence, machine learning, and things like this. This is an interesting article published by MIT Technology Review about this man who was arrested and convicted based on a faulty facial recognition match. And then, of course, Axon's Axon AI, which has shifted a focus. They're known for their kind of less than lethal manufacture of the projectile electrode gun, aka the taser, which you've probably heard of. And they've grown their business model to use machine learning to comb through police body camera video. Axon reports it is managing and storing more than 120,000 terabytes of video data from 14,000 police agencies in its private cloud-based storage system. And I really recommend watching All Light Everywhere, 2021 film by director Theo Anthony, if you're interested in that. And then just a couple slides here about some in the United States, which was leaked by Edward Snowden, which you might be familiar with. And you can watch the film Citizen 4 if you're interested in that. And you can see the collection efforts in the United States, starting with Microsoft back in 2007, going all the way, through AOL, Apple, 2012, etc. I had an idea when I first started using digital photography in the early aughts. While enormous, pixels represent a finite number of combinations for a given image. Here's a quick slide that mathematically illustrates my idea. If we could make a computer program that created noise patterns within this framework, we would eventually come across an image that we could recognize. based on the knowledge of visual structures we have encountered in our lifetime. Now, what if we could steer that randomness in one direction or another? Provide that system of noise some feedback on the way it's generating. This is how generative adversarial networks were conceived. Professors Yoshua Bendio, Geoffrey Hinton, and Jan LeCun were awarded a $1 million Turing Award for their efforts in spearheading similar ideas from their contributions in the field of machine learning. The process of image synthesis uses neural networks pitted against one another. GANs train two neural networks called the generator and the discriminator. The role of the generator is to produce realistic samples from noise, and the role of the discriminator is to distinguish those generated samples from real data. These two neural networks play a dynamic game against each other. If trained long enough, eventually the generator learns to produce samples that are indistinguishable from real data. The discriminator is trained on a specific visual data set. In our instance, with the channeling project, all 70,000 images from the Badabat compound archive. And just a couple other documentation images of the channeling project. Here it is in Berlin, 4 positions. Oops. And here at the Jan van Eyck Academy. This is a modular LED screen. My recent project, Parser, examines the BlueLeaks archive of internal US law enforcement data obtained by the hacker collective Anonymous. Using a machine learning system called DANE, the images in the archive are tweened to produce amalgamated synthesized images, disrupting the promise of AI-assisted predictive police algorithms and data forensics. The image set is comprised of fusion-centered data shared by a federally sanctioned system of monitoring, recording, collecting, and consolidating national crime evidence for the purposes of arresting and convicting offenders across state lines. While the national network of fusion centers was originally developed to assist law enforcement in combating terror shortly after 9/11, the majority of the image data consists of illegible security footage, stills taken by police while visiting loss prevention departments at big box chains. In the system, the police become the enforcement mechanism for the business interests of multinational corporations and their shareholders. My resulting work with the archive reimagines the evidence files as malleable objects, moving through refusals of fixity, indecipherability, and contradiction. The works question the promise of artificial intelligence as an emergent technology to aid in the efforts of the semio-capitalist police state. And this is the Renaissance Society in Chicago, and some, it's in the planning phases. So I thought I would share a couple of the planning phases images. We're still figuring it out, but this may or may not be how the project is installed. In conclusion, I call for efforts to produce bastard omnigenic AI projects, ceaseless emergence or input without utility, illegible archives that pollute the channels of intelligibility and rationale. Our only useful weapons against the fascist populism of our moment is to flood the algorithms with useless metadata, a signal to noise ratio that becomes untenable for media companies and governments to withstand. Consider the hacking work of Sean Black at Black_Madness21 on TikTok, whose recent efforts include creating a script that allows individuals to flood the website of Texas Abortion Reporting and the website for the Kellogg's brand, which created a form for hiring scab workers to counter recent union efforts. Misdirections like these create a superimposition that render the efforts of illegible omnigenous untenable. Thank you.